Greetings, fellow viewers. It is I, YouTube Provocateur Yong here, and I have returned to provoke discussion yet again to my mindless minions, the hundreds of thousands of subscribers, through my provocative ways. Or at least that's the label Kotaku editor Jason Schreier chose for me, which I mainly found kind of hilarious. But if having thoughts and opinions on what I believe to be relevant topics of gaming discussion constitutes being called provocateur, then by all means I'll pin that label proudly. All joking aside though, let's discuss the contents of Jason's article, which is primarily a response to a Forbes article that criticized Bethesda's decades-old game engine as a liability before highlighting one particular statement that Todd Howard provided to website GameStar back in June 2018 that many fans expressed their concern over. Todd Howard said, quote, "For Fallout 76, we have changed a lot. The game uses a new renderer, a new lighting system, and a new system for the landscape generation. For Starfield, even more of it changes, and for The Elder Scrolls 6, out there on the horizon, even more. We like our editor. It allows us to create worlds really fast, and the modders know it really well. There are some elementary ways we create our games, and that will continue, because that lets us be efficient, and we think it works best." Now, the video of mine that Jason Schreier was so kind to single out was in relation to that particular quote, and what I basically expressed was that unless Bethesda starts to show drastic improvements in their framework and game-making tools they've been using for decades now, maybe it's time for a change. I expressed that as fond as I am of Bethesda games, as many fond memories I've made with them, the one thing that's holding them back right now is their aging technology, which has failed to keep up with each iteration. You look at current generation games like Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, and anyone who's played Bethesda games throughout the years will tell you that they're plagued by similar issues as older titles like Oblivion and even Morrowind. There have obviously been a lot of enhancements over the years. Graphics have generally gotten better, new game mechanics like seamless conversations with NPCs have been introduced, aspects of gameplay have seen a number of refinements, but at the same time, in many regards, Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 look and feel as dated as Oblivion. The shortcomings of Bethesda's engine were far more forgivable for a game like Oblivion, as all things considered, this was a game that broke new grounds for its time, but Bethesda's technological stagnation is becoming ever more apparent with each release, and no game highlights this better than Fallout 76, which is a technical mess. Which is why when the creative head of Bethesda Game Studio suggested that their process won't change from Fallout 4 to Fallout 76 to Starfield to Elder Scrolls 6, that they'll use the same elementary ways to create their games because it lets them be efficient, many fans who have been clamoring for the studio to keep up with the times expressed understandable disdain and concern. These concerns are compounded by the fact that each time Bethesda suggested in the past how new technology and iterative changes would be implemented for future titles, fundamental issues that have plagued their games for years remained. But according to Kotaku, the concerns and recent controversy surrounding what Todd Howard suggested in that interview are misguided due to a fundamental misunderstanding of what a game engine actually is among the gaming community. Throughout the article, Jason proceeds to explain what a game engine actually entails, with some notable quotes including the following. An engine isn't a single program or piece of technology, it's a collection of software and tools that are changing constantly. To say that Starfield and Fallout 76 are using the same engine because they might share an editor and other common traits is like saying Indian and Chinese meals are identical because they both feature chicken and rice. What we see on the outside, like a game's graphical style, its animation system, and its physics, can be changed in all sorts of ways without switching to a new engine. Say you've just made Super Plumber Adventure. It sold a couple of copies, and now you want to make a sequel, which you know will share many of the same traits. You still want your plumber to run from left to right, you still want mushrooms to make him bigger, and you still want coins to disappear when he collects them. Rather than write new code and create new animations for all of these things, you might take what you built for the first game and reuse it, bundling all of those features together as a physics system. Combine those physics system with some other systems, like a level editor and a memory management tool, and you've got an engine, a collection of software that you can use from game to game in order to avoid redundant work. Super Plumber Adventure 2 will hopefully take a lot less time now that you have already got so much done. When we use terms like Unreal or Frostbite, that's what we're talking about, a framework for making games. These are not immutable creations, and in fact, a game's programmers will alter an engine's features constantly based on what suits their needs. Most game studios have tools programmers who dedicate their entire jobs to working on these features. Often, fans will associate certain engines with specific graphical styles, but that can be misleading because two games can run on the same engine but have very different art direction. Both the retro-styled Octopath Traveler and realistic-looking Days Gone use Unreal Engine 4. Both the sports series FIFA and the upcoming shared world shooter Anthem use Frostbite. Oftentimes, aspects of an engine will be in development alongside the game. In other words, Bethesda's engine in 2018 looks drastically different than it did in 2013, and by the time The Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, it will look like something else entirely. The editor might be similar, as Howard implies in that quote, but that's just one component of an engine that has been changing for years and years. This is not uncommon, by the way, as one game developer pointed out to me this morning. Even the ubiquitous Unreal Engine 4 is still built on a foundation that started with the first Unreal, which came out in 1998. So, first things first, I don't disagree with anything that's being said here. There's some good insight there, and I'm aware that a game engine isn't comprised solely of a single piece of software, but rather from a multitude of them, each with their own part to play in a game's elements and systems. But at the same time, a lot of the parallels he draws here are, in my opinion, not ideal when we're discussing Bethesda specifically. He talks about how Unreal Engine 4 is technically built on a foundation that started with the first Unreal from 2 decades ago, which is totally true. However, Unreal Engine has actually managed to keep up with the times, and there's a much wider disparity in what the engine was capable of 2 decades ago versus what it's capable now compared to Bethesda's framework. Unlike Unreal Engine, Bethesda's proprietary take on Gamebryo seems to maintain far too many of its antiquated features, leading to some very familiar problems with each iteration. And I'm not just talking about stuff you can see on the outside. I know that game engines are modular and allow for Bethesda to dramatically tweak their renderers, their physics engine, their animation engine, and whatnot, and improvements can be made there. In fact, it was during E3 2018 that Todd Howard talked about how Bethesda would be using a new animation engine for next-gen titles like Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6, so we'll see how that goes. But when problems from decades ago persist, it's hard not to wonder whether these fundamental issues across all Bethesda games have less to do with Bethesda's internal process and more to do with an aging, inefficient framework that may be hampering the studio's potential. Yes, a game engine is a collection of software, but there is a glue that holds it all together, and that's the core framework, the core engine, what we call Gamebryo, Unreal, Unity, Frostbite, so on and so forth. And each core framework has their strengths and weaknesses, their specialities and their limitations. That's why if you wanted to make, say, a soccer game, the creation engine would probably not be your first pick. I'm sure the engine can be iterated, edited, and modulated in such a way that it could accommodate a sports game or a racing game or a fighting game or whatever, but you'd want to pick an engine and a core framework that will make it more efficient to make the best version of your game possible and that will ultimately yield the best results, regardless of what renderer, physics engine, or animation engine you intend to use layered on top. There's a reason why some games are made on the Unity engine and others in the Unreal engine. Each offer their own advantages, whether it be optimal efficiency or optimal fidelity for the kind of game you want to make. Jason Schreier said it himself in his article discussing some of the struggles that BioWare faced when developing Mass Effect Andromeda. Here's what Jason reported one of his sources told him. While describing Frostbite, one top developer on Mass Effect Andromeda used the analogy of an automobile. Epic's Unreal engine, that developer said, is like an SUV, capable of doing lots of things but unable to go at crazy high speeds. The Unity engine would be a compact car, small, weak, and easy to fit any place you'd like. Frostbite, the developer said, is a sports car, not even a sports car, a Formula 1. When it does something well, it does it extremely well. When it doesn't do something, it really doesn't do something. I suppose technically any engine could be used to make any kind of game, but some frameworks are just better suited for certain types of games than others. Similarly, Gamebryo is obviously very good at certain things, but at the same time, problems that have persisted over decades may indicate that there are some drawbacks that are inherent to the rocky Gamebryo foundation upon which the rest of the engine is being built upon. Now, I won't claim to be a programmer or to have gleaned into the hood of the creation engine, so I cannot say with absolute certainty that the persistent pattern of technical mishaps across all Bethesda games isn't just the result of a lackluster development process rather than an inherent problem with the framework. But given Bethesda's track record, I also don't think it's unfair to assume that Gamebryo could be the core issue here, that the flawed aging heart of what comprises Bethesda's game engine may be what's causing technological stagnation, that it's the limitations of the framework that's holding Bethesda back from fully realizing their wonderful creative ambitions. If we're talking purely semantics, sure, perhaps saying Bethesda needs a new engine may not be exactly the right way to put it. Perhaps a better way to put it is that the old framework needs to be broken down and rebuilt, or be overhauled like Unreal has been doing with each engine iteration. Maybe they don't have to start from zero if it is indeed possible to bring Gamebryo up to speed with time and effort. Then again, if all else fails and problems persist, perhaps Bethesda should invest in a new framework altogether that will allow for more significant improvements with each iteration and allow for more flexibility in their game development process. Obviously, it's more cost-efficient to simply iterate on existing software and code, and I'm well aware plenty of other game developers are using engines that are many years old. Death Stranding's Decima engine, for example, is very much an iteration of the engine that Guerrilla Games has been using for years now, and they have extrapolated upon it to an extent that it's now suitable for sprawling open-world games like Horizon Zero Dawn. But whatever Epic Games is doing with Unreal, or whatever Guerrilla Games is doing with Decima, it's actually working, which is why people won't complain about these specific companies iterating on their old engine, because each iteration actually feels new or updated. Bethesda, on the other hand, is a special case in that they're falling so far behind. Even when Fallout 4 launched, it felt like it was teetering the line between last gen and current gen, and Fallout 76 is just a technical travesty for a late 2018 game. So, call me Provocateur, but if you ask me, something about Bethesda's game-making tools need to dramatically change, which is why I believe that the fundamental notion of Bethesda needs a new engine isn't at all misguided. Maybe it's semantically wrong to say it exactly that way, maybe that's too simple a way to put it, and Jason's insight on how game engines function is very helpful indeed in painting a clearer picture, but it changes nothing about Bethesda's desperate need for a revision. Obviously, years down the line, the creation engine won't exactly be the same, but will the framework still be similar enough that it will cause the same problems we have known for so long? Now, something else Jason might be saying is that Todd Howard's quote here doesn't necessarily indicate that Gamebryo won't receive drastic enhancements. That Todd Howard straight up says changes will come for future games, and that there is no reason to panic from a quote like this. Well, that's your take on it, and that's your prerogative, but for others, what Todd Howard is saying here implies that it will be business as usual for Bethesda, that they'll change the engine as they've been doing rather than take further steps, which isn't enough if their recent releases are to go by, especially as Bethesda continues to lose their lead while other studios pull way ahead in pushing the boundaries of open world games. The fact of the matter is that Todd Howard's statement that they'll continue with their elementary ways for the sake of efficiency does not inspire confidence. Now, I would love nothing more than to have my skepticisms proven wrong when Starfield does finally launch. I'm not expecting it to be perfect, as even the best games have their fair share of bugs and glitches. I'm just looking for a general sense of polish and modern refinement that is simply not present in their games. Granted, it's definitely early to say for sure that the creation engine won't be enhanced in such a way that it might finally feel like something new, something overhauled. But given Bethesda's track record, until Bethesda can prove the creation engine framework can be enhanced to adequately compete with others out there, thinking that perhaps Bethesda would be better off finding or building a new framework in parallel to the ongoing development of upcoming games isn't an unreasonable prospect to think about. Graphics can improve, animations can improve, new features can be added, gameplay can be refined, and new renderers and engines can be layered on top, for sure. But when it's the house frame residing behind the walls, underneath the floors, and beyond the furniture and the paint that's compromised, then the whole house is compromised no matter how much you spruce it up. Or to use Jason's own analogy, old rice and chicken will still taste like old rice and chicken regardless of whether you use it to make Chinese or Indian food. The spices, sauces, and condiments might be able to cover it up to some extent, but the core ingredients of these dishes are chicken and rice, and when that's compromised, the whole dish is compromised. Again, I won't claim for a fact that this is indeed the problem we are dealing with, as I don't know what's underneath the hood of the creation engine, but there is enough out there to suggest that this is a possibility. So yeah, that's my take on the situation, folks. I hope you got something out of my latest provocation. I'd love to hear your provocations on this matter in the comments below, and if you've worked with game engines and there is additional insight or knowledge or corrections you can provide, be sure to let us know. At least, unlike Jason, who many users have reported is blocking people on Twitter who provide any kind of disagreeable feedback, however constructive or politely given, I welcome constructive discussion on all fronts. Not to say that he can't do whatever he wants with his Twitter account, but when he constantly touts that there is a need for nuanced discussion, and he resorts to shutting down even non-toxic feedback, or to looking down his nose at those who question him, I don't know, that noble pursuit starts to ring hollow. Also, unlike Jason, I'm not gonna stoop to just looking at something of his I disagree with and giving him some label as if that's representative of his entire body of work. Despite my qualms, there is no denying that Jason's published many respectable articles, though I would argue that many of them in themselves have provoked certain game publishers, developers, and consumers, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Even his latest article does its fair share of provoking, if that's his definition of calling people out and expressing dissent over a topic based on your knowledge, beliefs, and ideals. Either way, I will say that I think he genuinely cares about the issues he speaks about. I think there's some good insight there in his latest article that's worth a read, and I most certainly don't think he's a corporate shill or anything, as some like to claim, especially since many of his investigative reports have been to the detriment of game companies and to the benefit of readers and video game consumers. He also encouraged in his article that Bethesda should be criticized for their game's bugs and graphical failings, though again, his argument is that the whole notion of Bethesda not working on a new engine is misguided due to a misinterpretation of what a game engine actually is. I personally don't agree with that last part though, as none of what he said detracts from the notion that Bethesda's most recent games have retained unfavorable aspects of their older titles, suggesting drastic changes are required for the studio to stay relevant, whether it be via a major overhaul of their existing core framework, or by investing in a new framework altogether. And look, if Bethesda can come out and provide some reassurances about their future plans with their technology, then great, but right now, all we have to go on is Bethesda's track record and Todd Howard's somewhat middling statement, and with the recent half-baked release of Fallout 76, I would say that now is a pretty good time to bring up tangible concerns for the future. That's my personal perspective anyway. With that, I'd like to end this discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy my content and would like to support this channel directly, consider donating on Patreon. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.